But first of all, biggest winners. I think the biggest winner, in my opinion, is probably got to be Rishabh Pant. Obviously, the whole Indian team had a pretty incredible series, but Rishabh Pant really announced himself onto the scene. From the get-go, really, in his test career, he was almost an instant, overnight sensation. We hear a lot of his chat behind the stumps, and he's quite a lovable character. He's real huggable, which has been a big topic of conversation between me and my mates this weekend. But the way he bats, it's really entertaining, especially in contrast to someone like a Pujara. And yeah, his chirp behind the stumps is always good fun. But he really announced himself as a proper test player in this test series. There were probably a few batsmen short with Kohli going back home. Rahul was injured, so they needed someone else to step up and really help out Pujara and Rahane. And Pant did that. He scored 250s, but both crucial innings. He obviously did it at a pretty fast rate compared to most. He had a strike rate of 70 in the series, but he scored 274 runs, India's top run scorer for the series, and he played one less test than the likes of Pujara and Rahane. So incredible stuff. Average of 68. Sadly, didn't get that 100. Got out for 97, but both of his 50s probably in terms of weight and importance were as good as any 100 will ever be. So Rishabh Pant is probably the biggest winner for me. Moving forward, I think he's a lock in that Indian team, whether it's with the gloves or whether it's as a specialist batsman. I think he is someone definitely worth picking at 6, especially if you can sneak a Jadeja or Ashwin in at 7 or 8. Then all of a sudden you've got some pretty good depth with the bat. He's got room to improve on with the gloves, but as Gilly kept mentioning all summer, that will come with more test experience. Gilly said from his first test to his last, he improved heaps with the gloves, so hopefully Pant can work on that. But even if he's just picked as a specialist batsman, he's shown that he is certainly good enough to do that for this Indian side, and for me, he is the number one biggest winner coming out of this. My second winner of the biggest winner of the series, obviously there are a lot of winners, almost the whole Indian side, and a couple Aussies had great summers, but I'm going to go Shubman Gill. He was India's 4th top run scorer, but he was only 15 runs behind the top run scorer in Pant. He scored 259 runs in 6 innings. He also missed out on that glamorous first test 100 that everyone dreams of, but he scored 2 impressive 50s, and he just looked like a top quality test batsman from his first innings. I watched him in person in Melbourne, and he just looked a different class, really. There was huge debate coming into this series whether they go with Prithvi Shaw, whether they go with Shubman Gill, and after the first test, Shubman Gill came in, and I hate to say it, I don't think Prithvi Shaw's career is over at all. He's still very, very young and a very, very exciting prospect, but Gill, I think, is locked in that spot now for a decade, if not, if he keeps this up. And Shaw's got to fight for another spot throughout that batting lineup, because that opening spot is now being solidified with the great series from Gill. He looks like one for the future. India just seem to keep producing these gun batsmen. Only recently it was really only 1 or 2 a decade, and now this current generation looks like they've got 3 or 4 world-class talents, and they're looking like a pretty scary proposition moving forward. And I think outrageous test victories like Australia in Australia are going to be a lot more frequent for this Indian side with this batting lineup. So here's another big winner from this. I think another big winner, I'm probably going to say more than 3 because it's hard not to mention a lot of these Indian players. I think Ravi Jadeja came out of this series looking real good. He only batted twice, only played in 2 matches, missed out in a couple due to injury and selection reasons, but he averaged 85 with the bat, scored 1 crucial 50 in Melbourne, and he just looked really good, and he also came away with 7 wickets in 37 overs, which is pretty outrageous. Average of 15, strike rate of 32. For a spinner in Australia, that's pretty incredible. We saw how much Nathan Lyon struggled. Ravi Ashwin had a pretty good series, but we've seen how much he's struggled in the past as well. So Jadeja, he's usually just the second spinner that gets rolled in on spinning decks, but for him to come in and really have an influential performance in this series, he was a huge reason why they won that Melbourne Test, in my opinion. And yeah, I just can't, even though he only played 2 matches, I think Ravi Jadeja comes out of this test looking really good. And I think from now, for the next few years, even on a batting track, I think you've got to have Ravi Jadeja in there somewhere. And this is another thing Rishabh Pant having a great series gives them. If he can be a specialist bat, he could bat 6, Jadeja 7, Ashwin 8. And all of a sudden you've got 5 bowling options going into every test match, which is a pretty dream situation for any coach or captain. And speaking of captains, I think Ajinkya Rahane is another guy who has come out of this series looking really good. Everyone kind of just assumed when Kohli would leave that the wheels would fall off, but it was almost the opposite. Not that that's a personal attack at Virat at all. I think it was just a whole team thing really, but the way Rahane really led them, we saw some very interesting fields under his guidance. He seems to take the game on, and he seems to really think hard and long about how to get some of these Australian batsmen out, and he's very creative in the way he goes about it. And some of his tactical decisions, whether they were his or Ravi Shastri's, just seemed to pay off time and time again. And he also had a pretty solid season with the bat. In terms of an average of 38, he'd probably looking for a bit more than that, but when you consider it's against Australia, one of the best bowling attacks in the world, in Australia, one of the hardest places to bat for subcontinental batsmen, I think he had a pretty good series. And once again, like Jadeja, he was a huge reason why they won that test match in Melbourne with that match-winning century. So yeah, he was 6 runs off India's top run scorer, but I think Rahane also had a really, really good summer in Australia, and he's not going to probably captain too many games into the future, if I'm honest, but they've shown that without Kohli, they've got a man sitting right there, capable, ready to go at all times. In terms of the Australian side, winners, look, Marnus had an absolute cracker of a series. He did only score 100, which would probably be a bit disappointing for him, considering how many starts he had, but over 400 runs at 53, he's just basically once again proven that his start to his career was not a fluke, and that he is seriously of this quality. He looks like a dead set top 5, if not higher, batsman in the world. He looks at a lot of the time as good as Smith. So can't really speak enough of Marnus in terms of that. He had a really good summer, so he was probably the blinding, shining light for Australia, next to probably Hazlewood and Cummins, who really, we'll talk about Lyon and Stark in a second, but they really had to carry the bowling attack, Hazlewood and Cummins, as they so often do. It's probably been overlooked at times how much, especially Hazlewood. I think Cummins gets the plaudits he deserves, but I think Hazlewood sometimes goes under the radar, but Stark and Lyon's lack of form of late, I think, has really shown how good of a test cricketer Josh Hazlewood really is. 17 wickets at an average of 19. It's pretty impressive against a really top quality batting lineup. But yeah, that's probably all we can say about Australia. Smith had a few good innings. Payne showed resilience quite often, but still didn't get that century he so badly wants. Cameron Green, not so much with the ball, but with the bat, he had a pretty good start to his career. He made 150, but scored over 200 runs for the summer. But yeah, sadly, when we're talking about Australia, we're probably going to be talking more about biggest losers. For me, the biggest losers are Stark and Lyon. Pretty much everyone in the Australian media and public is calling for their heads. People don't want to see them picked in the team in South Africa, which I think is going to be a real interesting thing to watch out for. They seem like two real big characters in the dressing room. Lyon has been there. He's one of the longest serving players, if not the longest. He leads the song, which is a really big thing in Australian cricket. Stark seems like he's kind of the captain of that bowling group, I'd say, in terms of he seems like a big talker and stuff like that. And he seems to, he's always a big presence in the media. So it's going to be interesting to see whether they have the balls to drop those two. They did have horrific summers, averages of over 40. Nathan Lyon took only 9 wickets in 187 overs. When you compare that to Jadeja, who took 7 wickets in 37 overs, that's basically speaks for itself. So they're probably the two biggest losers, I think. We'll get on to who could replace those two moving on, but I'll be honest, I don't actually know if they're going to get dropped. I think Stark just because Hazelwood and Cummins are so reliable. I think Stark will get dropped because that's a pretty safe play from Australia. But I'm not sure if they have the balls to drop Nathan Lyon. I think going in with another spinner would be a huge risk, and I'm definitely not against it. I would love to see it, but I do think they will stick with Nathan Lyon for South Africa, but we'll see what they'll do there. And then my other biggest loser, it's probably got to be the rest of the Australian batting lineup, really. Labuschagne had a great summer. Smith was pretty good. Maybe not up to his lofty standards, but he was good. Payne was solid. Didn't get that ton he was looking for. Pekoski, 50 on debut. That's pretty good. Green, his overall stats weren't bad, but if you looked at his individual innings, he showed glimpses of brilliance. But apart from that, that's where the issues are. There's just too much reliance on Labuschagne and Smith at the moment, and the fact that Pekoski and Green, two blokes in their first summers, had to kind of step up and fill the shoes of guys who weren't performing. We're looking at Travis Head, we're looking at Matthew Wade. They just didn't have good enough summers, really. I think Matthew Wade will be lucky to be playing in South Africa. I don't know why Matthew Wade is just beloved in Victoria, and there's something about it that everyone loves him here, but an average of 21 against what at times was India's 6th, 7th, 8th best pace bowlers. That's not good enough for Matthew Wade. And to me, it was more disappointing the way he was getting out. He was getting himself in, and he was showing signs, and then he would just play an awful shot that just didn't belong on a test cricket field. He did that 3 or 4 times, so that was disappointing. Joe Burns, look, I feel a bit bad for Joe Burns because he probably shouldn't have been there in the first place, so he kind of just looked like a child swimming in an adult's pool. I don't know if that is a saying, but I've just whipped that out of my ass. Travis Head also got dropped, so he was a big loser. And Davey Warner is a bit of a surprising loser, but he didn't score a single 50 in 4 innings. He did look troubled from that injury most times, but it'll be a big series for him in South Africa, one of his favourite places to bat. If he goes and struggles there, all of a sudden questions probably will be raised about David Warner's career, as he is starting to get on in age and injuries might start to become more frequent, and that could start to see him slow down. But I think no one's really calling for his head at the moment. I think everyone's got to keep their cool. He has been a pretty reliable figure, especially at home. But that'll be a big series for him in South Africa. So there's a lot to watch out for in South Africa with this Australian team. I'm going to go on to who could be brought into the side or the squad going to South Africa. But yeah, definitely a few big losers coming out of it for Australia.
Queensland! It's a miracle! Oh yeah! What about that one? Unbelievable! Balotelli, Aguero! Crowd cheers. Here's Siddle.